Thanks everyone for joining us. You know, trains never leave early, so we're going to wait a minute or so. I see an awful lot of people still signing on. We actually may have a record number, so hopefully the conductors will let everybody on the train. One more minute and we will start. All right, we're going to start. I know a number of people are still logging on. I will say this more than once. I'm happy to say that everybody who is registered, they will get a link. This session is being recorded, and you will have a chance to get the slide decks from both Doug and myself, as well as to be able to share this recording, maybe share with colleagues, or maybe review something that was said. So I want to welcome everybody to the 2025 Tech Forecast for State and Local IT. So all aboard the AI train and more adventures to come. So I'm Alan Shark. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Technology Institute. And joining me on our virtual stage or train journey is my good friend and colleague, Doug Robinson, Executive Director of NASCIO. So over the next hour, Doug and I will present our annual preview of the issues and priorities that will impact state and local government IT in the coming year. And we will explore the trends, pain points, as well as opportunities that promise to make 2025 an intriguing year for the government IT community. This webinar will highlight key findings from both NASCIO and PTI research. We'll be culling from surveys, interviews with technology executives, and what we are hearing from our private sector partners. This is about, we think, the 12th year, the 14th. I know it's an even number. It's either the 12th or 14th. Doug and I are losing track that both PTI and NASCIO have presented this forecast. Doug is going to go first, and he will present the state view. And after that, I will follow with the local government tech view. And we will provide some time for Q&A. So please type your questions in the chat window. So let's climb aboard the train and start our journey with Doug Robinson, the first stop, the state perspective. Doug, it is always a pleasure to share the stage with you, this time the train station.
Yes, thank you, Alan, and always a pleasure as well. And Alan is very adept at creating AI imagery, and I think you could see that in the train station that we just had NASCIO branded. So appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all this year again. Uh, Alan and I have respectively been executive directors for organizations for over 20 years now. So we certainly have a long history in understanding these two critical segments of the IT marketplace and those trends. So with that, let's get all aboard and talk about the states. Next, Julie. I couldn't do this without starting immediately with our top 10 for our 2025. We've done this top 10 electronic ballot and priority ranking from our state CIOs every year since 2006. So we have, again, historical data and longitudinal data about what CIOs have been thinking since that time period. So each late fall in December of each year, we ask the state CIOs to provide us a top 10 around their technology priorities and priority strategies, as well as their technologies itself. That's part B. I'm just going to look at part A today, which is the most prominent set of priorities, and that is the top 10 in terms of their strategies and management processes. We had 50 state CIOs, states and territories, respond to our ballot this year. And I think you will notice, no surprise, cybersecurity is number one for the 12th consecutive year. Last year it tied with digital government services. A couple of things that I will point out before I move on is that artificial intelligence driven by Gen AI and a lot of the discussion we're going to have today vaulted up to number two. It was number three in 2024. Previously had not been on the list at all. So again, it moves off the list to number three, number two in 2025. Data management stays up very high and in fact increases to number four. A couple of other items I will point out before moving on is budget and cost control comes back on the list. I made this comment last year that I thought with ending of the pandemic era of federal funding and significant contributions from the federal coffers to state government that we might see the budget and cost control and the fiscal strains begin to come back on the list. And sure enough, there it is at number six from the state CIOs. Accessibility joins the list for the first time. Not surprising, DOJ's final rulemaking now puts date certain to states and local governments to meet DOJ accessibility requirements, particularly for electronic service. Anything online, anything mobile must now be compliant with WC3 concerns under the old 508 federal regulations. So states have been following those for a number of years, actually probably 20 plus years, but there's been no specific compliance and no consequences. Now there are, and so states must get right by 2026. So again, that's the top 10, and so we're going to touch on a few of these things very quickly. If I could move on, Julie, let's go to the next slide. And a couple of highlights here. State CIO transitions. People always want to know who's on first. So here's your heat map from the current set of conditions around our state CIO transitions. We had 12 changes of state CIOs in 2024. The last one being at the end of December. We now have three new CIOs in place for 2025 already. Two, Indiana and North Carolina because of gubernatorial transitions, and Oklahoma because of a resignation. So we had 8 gubernatorial elections with 8 new governors coming on. There were no party changes, therefore it's not as dramatic as it has been in the past. So we have states like Washington where the new governor has asked the incumbent CIO to remain in place. We may see that in a number of other states. So this story is still not finished. We may be a couple of months out before we find out the final placement, but right now you can see where we are in terms of 2025, at least in the month of January. We'll go back historically and talk about 2023, where we had 23 state CIO transitions in 1 year. So if you kind of look at this in the course of less than 2.5 years, we've had over 38 state CIO transitions. So it has a tremendous impact on the continuity of leadership. If I could go to the next slide, please, Julie. So let's dig right in. We talked about boarding the AI train, and this is going to be a significant part of our discussion today. This goes back a couple of years, or actually less than that, to our 2023 survey, where we asked this question about emerging IT. It's something that we do routinely in our state CIO surveys. And you can see, not surprisingly, as we split out Gen AI as a separate item, what I'll call kind of traditional AI stack of machine learning and RP and everything else, Gen AI became a dramatic part of the equation. And more than half of the respondents said that that's going to be the emerging area. If you combine that with what I would say the traditional AI and machine learning and natural language processing and all those other tools, you're looking at 83% considering that AI was going to be a driver in the next 3 to 5 years. So let's fast forward and kind of look at where we are today in the data. Next. Since 2018, I just want to remind everybody that we've done a whole set. This is not new to NASCIO. We've done a whole set of national studies and surveys and policy briefs, including an AI blueprint on artificial intelligence in state government. So we're going to touch on a few of these today, but I invite you, if anybody has any interest, to go back and kind of look at what we were saying in 2018 about AI and machine learning. And then, of course, the advent of Gen AI has tremendous impact on these conversations. So all these available, all these open to anyone on the NASCIO resource page on the website. Next. So one of the things we did in conversation with states was issue a blueprint just about a little over a year ago, where we as we saw the initial policy statements coming out of states and some of the initial draft legislation, said what are the 12 really key considerations that states should use. So this is kind of the blueprint for them to develop their AI roadmaps, their AI frameworks, their AI policies. As they began to work on that, we identified these 12 critical items. I've highlighted three, which I'm going to kind of touch on today because we've done follow-up empirical research with the states to see where they are in all of these areas. So I want to make sure we point those out as we move forward. Again, this is also available on the NASCIO website. Next. So if you look at those 12 items, one of the things we talked about was governance. We talked about policy. So in our 2024 State CO survey, we asked follow-up questions about all of those items, asking the states what was their current status. Now, this data is about 6 months old. However, I think we've seen some clear increases in some of these, but most importantly, from a governance side, almost a little over 3/4 of the states have already created advisory committees and task forces, and I'll show that graphically in a moment. Implementing policies and procedures, again, 3/4 of the states have worked on that. They've created kind of responsible use, ethical use guidelines. That's critically important for obviously continued positive movement forward with Gen AI. And then, of course, many states, either through executive order or through legislation, have required an inventory documenting use cases in agencies and those applications, including identifying products and solution sets. And that's where many of these, particularly AI and Gen AI, most importantly, applications are coming from. They're embedded in current products that the states are acquiring or they're using. And so that has part and parcel become a section of that documenting use case along with disclosure. Next, please. And so there's a quick representation of a heat map of the states that currently have AI committees and task forces. If you look at this, we've got about 13 of those that are in blue that actually are done by executive orders, prominently, I think California, Washington, Massachusetts, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, all those states, again, have an executive order. Some of them, like California and Washington, very expansive. They cover a lot of ground in terms of their AI executive order, and that part of that requires some type of committee, task force, or council. Other states, and I would highlight states like Texas and others that first one I believe might have been in Kansas that requires certain inventory, but again, those are done through legislation, and so they have again legislative authority to create that. Connecticut, I believe, was the first one, 2023, where they required an inventory, and again, that was via legislation enacted by the General Assembly in Connecticut in 2023. So they're already on their second round of reporting data around their inventory. So again, that's where we are. This will continue to expand. Just last week, I updated this with Mississippi. Governor Reeves of Mississippi issued an executive order just last week requiring that there be an AI task force and that group collect through CIO's office data and inventory all the existing uses of AI within state government in Mississippi. So again, continuing evolution of this, and we'll continue to move forward. Next. And a parcel with that is here we go with legislation, and you probably heard this already. 2023, there were bills introduced. 2024 was a watershed in terms of the number of bills introduced around that, over 300 in terms of 400, I think, in terms of AI across the board. And you can see from our colleagues here at National Conference of State Legislators report they put out at the end of December, which identified all the legislation. You see more than half of those bills related to government use. So there's certainly a section of those bills in many cases that are dealing with the regulation or regulatory umbrella over the private sector. They're concerned about responsible use. You see private sector use as second in this bar chart, but there's also obviously concerns around deep fakes, concerns around the creation of videos, child pornography, a lot of public consumer safety aspects of this. So again, a lot of details that NCSL is tracking around legislation. Next, please. So when we look at the top business processes where states are using Gen AI, again, from our national surveys, this is what the states have responded that is currently in use, and you're not going to be surprised to see what's in use. Particularly, we're using Zoom today, and Zoom has virtual assistant transcription capabilities and analysis capabilities. There's lots of tools now that have that. Cybersecurity operations were very high on the list for state CIOs as potential use cases, and I'll provide some data later on to talk about how it's out where the data is actually showing a substantial amount of use around Gen AI. And then traditional, I think, document generation, document management, email, crafting emails, monitoring that. All of that is, I think, a fairly standard across most of the states today, and they're using the predominantly publicly available platforms like Chat GPT. They're piloting many of these others. Some of them are the same. Some of the states are just further ahead. Some states prohibit a utilization of some of these tools by employees for certain things. Not surprisingly, that's going to evolve. We're going to see more and more policies and constraints around that. So there are definitely some tremendous opportunities, but also some tremendous challenges states are going to have to address in the near future. Next. So just quickly identifying from our state CIOs, what are some of the things that you're seeing out there in terms of the current IT use cases for generative AI? Again, some states are required to collect this data. Connecticut makes it publicly available. You can find their list of documented AI uses on the state portal. And so some states are making that available to the public as they're required to collect it because of the provisions in the legislation. So I'm not going to go through all these. Some of these you're not going to be surprised at. Some have been around for a while. Some are certainly have been already being used by traditional AI, and now they're simply being accelerated. They're now using these tools on, on steroids. We're going to see a lot of states begin to use Gen AI capabilities on software code conversion, remediating archaic code that they're still supporting and using those tools. One of, I think, the most promising areas, and I know we've had conversations with our state CIO members about the use of fraud prevention and detection tools, and again, AI analysis, getting out in front of the tremendous amount of fraud that state government and other governments are experiencing in online services, and using AI to do fraud detection on the front end. And I think we're going to see that with behavioral analytics and other capabilities being accelerated with Gen AI tools. Second part of the list next. Some of these things that have been reported by states, particularly in the areas of transportation and public health. Again, I mentioned cybersecurity. States have been using tools for several years in this area provided by the vendor community or that have capabilities in machine learning. And they're now just, again, advancing those capabilities and doing more. Streamlining procurement. We issued a report just about a month and a half ago that feel free to look at with our partners at NASPO, the state procurement officials. We looked at opportunities to utilize Gen AI in the procurement processes and acquisition. And it lists a whole set of opportunities and a whole set of recommendations for state officials to utilize procurement in Gen AI in the procurement activities. Some of these have already, that means I'm listed here, have already are in pilot stages or are being demonstrated in sandboxes in a number of states. And some will be, I think, in production in the very near future under controlled environments. So exciting to see what the states are going to be doing. Next, please. So one quick example, I could have used many examples, but I thought one that was illustrative was from the state of Texas. This is from the CIO office, and they were, again, required to inventory. So you have, again, a breakdown, a very easy way to look at what the data they retrieve from over 500 ADS, what they're calling automated decision systems. Those are using artificial intelligence, and you can see the institutes of higher education, top application categories, and then state agencies. So these are mandatory reporting, and you can see, again, a high focus on business automation, a high focus on security systems and security operations, content management, and also data analytics. And so again, this is available in the report from DIR, looking at those applications. So you're going to see more and more states being able to provide this data and those opportunities that they see in the future for AI. So again, more good market intelligence. Next, please. So let me kind of end with our latest report, which was the President's initiatives for 2024 under past President Jim Weaver of North Carolina. This was his initiative, was to look at the risk and rewards of Gen AI in state government. This report's available on the website. I provided you with some sample, just some quotes here from a number of the CIOs on their view of AI. Again, I think the risk and rewards are clear here with some some strong governance work by the states and making sure that the citizens again see this as being transparent. They also uh, are certainly concerned about ethical and responsible use of these tools. And in some cases, we see legislative bodies already crafting constraints and restrictions around where these can be used for things like integrated eligibility and for eligibility determination. They've already decided that there will be no use of these tools, that you need to have humans making those decisions, not on automated Gen AI capability to address that. So I think there's going to be a lot of considerations around that, and so there's going to be other things that the states are going to address where they might see concerns. And I think again, a good quote there is uh, where we don't have unintended consequences, and I think that's going to take some time. So next, please, before we kind of wrap up on a couple of key areas. So in this report, we have a whole set of recommendations about our direction from states, and you're going to see states that are already doing all of these. And a couple of challenges that I'll point out is one is just data quality, data integrity, and that is a major challenge. And so we really want to see a lot of collaboration, and want to see transparency. We want to see disclosure, but that's going to require strong governance. And so we see, I think, across the board states are going to need stronger governance in place across and by that I mean enterprise governance, where the CIO is collaborating with all of the executive branch agencies to make sure we have ethical, responsible use and making sure they are addressing all of those risks. And I see some states that are really doing that in a remarkable way today with that collaboration, and we're going to see that grow. So, next, please. I'm going to touch a little about cybersecurity since it is number one. We can't ignore that here on the AI train. But a good thing to look at here is the fact that Gen AI has significant impacts on cybersecurity today, both on the operational side in terms of the capabilities that it brings to supporting the humans within the cybersecurity security operations center and other capabilities of analytics and log analysis and detecting anomalies, things that has been used before with machine learning, and now we're going to be applying Gen AI to that. But it also obviously has the downside, which is the use by adversaries and threat actors to use Gen AI to generate remarkable, sophisticated phishing attempts and software engineering and things like that that are social engineering that are really causing states problems and other government institutions as well. But again, these are some of the top priorities today. I haven't changed too dramatically in the last year, other than we're now on year 2 of the state and local cyber grant, soon to move into year 3. And that is something that's something we need to continue to monitor as states are building stronger and stronger partnerships with their local governments. So let's look at some of the data next, if we could, on the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. Again, I would invite you to review our biennial survey with Deloitte on cybersecurity. We've been doing this since 2010. It's a remarkable set of data from the CISO. So these are the chief information security officers. For 50 of them respond to this very comprehensive survey, and you will see right up top of the list in terms of cybersecurity incidents over the last year, one of the leading causes, which was not on the list in 2022, was AI-enabled attacks. And so we're seeing more and more of that. Three-quarters of the states report that. So we have an increasing set of cybersecurity breaches involving third parties. And again, that's critically important. We just had a major cybersecurity breach involving a third party this week in the K through 12 sector, and that's what been widely reported. And I think a number of states have been impacted, by that. So we're going to see more of that. We're certainly going to see more nation state and foreign state sponsored cyber attacks as that ramps up, and we've seen increasing problems with our foreign adversaries that have really become highly sophisticated in using those tools. So again, this information is available in this report. Again, this is data directly from the CISOs. Next. And I think an interesting aspect of all of this is we did have a number of questions in this survey about AI and Gen AI. And so looking at the current and planned use of Gen AI and cyber ops, you see 41%. So almost half the states have reported that is already in use or they plan uh, to use it within the next 12 months. So in this time frame, again, in 2025, we would expect to see, close to 90% of the states utilizing Gen AI in some way. And again, I would report that many of these utilizations are coming through products that the states are acquiring, major platforms to support their cybersecurity operations, and they're going to get these tools in those capabilities that they're bringing in. Next, Julie. So challenges, and I'm gonna point out a couple here because there's a number of things we can talk about. Each of these requires a lot of conversation about the challenges that states are going to face. Many of these are being addressed in their executive orders or by the policies that the CIO offices have issued or are creating. But these are things that the states are going to have to address, and that's very, very important. I'm going to talk about the two highlighted here, which we have surveys that we've released that cover those and get perspectives from CIOs and chief data officers. So next, and let me wrap up with two of these. So a national survey that we did with EY in 2024, we looked at the intersection of data management, data quality, data integrity, and the adoption of Gen AI within their state, recognizing the importance of the data sources and again, large language models and the criticality of that. Not surprisingly, 96% of those respondents said we do anticipate that these things will impact data management and the importance of data management. So again, keep that 96%, very incredible response rate from our states about how the importance. Let's look at the next slide, please, for the data. And then how would you rate the importance of data quality in your organization? Again, 91% either rank it important, very important, or critically important. Yet there's a long way between the lip and the cup, as we like to say, and that is, do you have a data quality program? 78% said no. So we have a knowing doing gap here, and I think all of the states know that. In many cases, the state CIO couldn't possibly launch a data quality program for all of the agencies within the states. So that's going to have to be done on an agency basis, but there may have to be some enterprise imperatives, enterprise requirements, and driven by, again, some type of programs coming out of the CIO office. And we see a number of states already doing that. So again, that's very important to understand is there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the data quality integrity area to make sure that we have successful long-term adoption of broad Gen AI models within the state. So again, one aspect of this is addressing that. Next. And let's look at the workforce. So again, another collaborative project that we did in 2024 with McKinsey, we looked at generative AI and its impact on the state IT workforce. We didn't look at the total workforce. We just asked the CIOs about their concerns on the impact of Gen AI. And as you can see, not surprisingly, and again, being addressed by some states already, is the fact that they're concerned about the skills and capabilities of their existing workforce. So more than half said the lack of necessary skills was going to be an impediment to their continued adoption of these concerns. What's interesting, we hear a lot about, well, this is going to take people's jobs away. This is going to replace state government workforce. But again, as you see here, only 4%, that's two states, indicated their concerns are about workforce and labor displacement. So again, I think the most pressing issue here is how to rapidly upskill the existing workforce and making sure that they're using these tools in an appropriate, responsible, and ethical way within their particular domains within state government. So that's something we have to look at. Next. So let's look at just the overarching tech forecast from the NASCIO perspective for 2025. I've touched on a number of these things. I think the AI train is going to continue and probably accelerate in 2025. We're already seeing a substantial number of bills, both pre-filed and already in session with states around AI and generative AI. I think we're going to see broader governance. We're going to see more states passing policy. They're going to be addressing the data quality. We already have a number of states that have come out with programs to do that. States that have already launched workforce training programs that have been, again, been publicly reported. And I think the other thing, which will be consistent with 2024, is a significant increase in technology-related policy in our legislative bodies. We're seeing an interesting list. If you look at the top issues from the state legislative groups in 2025, artificial intelligence on that list. That's the first time I recall in 20 years seeing a technology actually listed on that, beyond something like cybersecurity as a kind of a broad risk management issue. But yeah, having artificial intelligence on there shows you how much the states are really going to be focused on this. And certainly another is things like social media safety and banning certain products. So we're going to see continued work in these other areas. And of course, the great unknown at this point, less than 2 weeks out from inauguration day, is the impact of new Congress and the new administration on state and local government technology policy. We're monitoring that, obviously. We're going to have some meetings and hopefully have our voice be heard. One of the things that we're already hearing is there could be a number of existing AI policies, the AI executive order, and others that could be repealed right off the bat. So we'll have to wait and see whether that comes to fruition, and we'll be monitoring that. So, and lastly, Julie, let's go to the last slide here, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Shark, and that is, as always, everything I talked about today is publicly available. NASCIO does not run a paywall, so you can hit the resource center at nascio.org and monitor all of these reports and download all this wonderful data and do your own analysis. And with that, again, questions in the chat. Alan, I will turn it over to you for the next train leaving the station.
Thank you, Doug. I'm exhausted listening to all the things that are going on, and from what you see, the good news is there are a lot of parallels to what we're seeing at the local government. So the next stop is cities and counties and townships across the country, and I'm going to do a similar approach by sharing data that we have collected from 3 different reports. Well, 2 reports and a survey and some observations. And again, I see in the chat people are asking, will the slide decks be available? The answer is yes, as will a link to the recording. You may want to look at this later or share with others. So with that, I'd like to talk about things that I saw this year that we never thought we'd be talking about. We were not talking about generative AI 3 years ago. It wasn't on any of our lists. It was just entering our radar scope. And yet last year I found myself writing about AI fatigue, in the sense that so many people are exhausted. It is everywhere in every product we are asked to buy. And then we suddenly realized that what's changing and morphing is that now we're talking to these entities. So the power of voice is going to continue through years to come, and the voice is getting better. Think Alexa, who is now just turned 10 years old, and yet the agents that we're talking to are a lot younger. So there's a lot more to happen. And now, for the first time, we're really dealing with even a new acronym, and that is AIOE, Artificial Intelligence of Everything. And that kind of caps it all in so many ways. So let me start with one of two surveys that we did at PTI. The first being Artificial Intelligence in City County Government. And these are some of the key survey results. We asked, what are the areas in which you are most focused on? And it's interesting. Last year it was cybersecurity, and this year we see virtual customer service via Copilot, chatbot. We are now looking at how we can better communicate with our citizens. So chatbots have kind of morphed from highly intelligent texting, a very intuitive texting, to actually using a voice. And that also suggests that we are getting multilingual in many of these applications. One of the easier ones, of course, is automation of documents, document generation here, automated or enhanced data management, query assistance, workforce training and learning, a GovGPT-like use case, code creation, and the like. So it gives you a sense of some of the things that our CIOs are contemplating right now. When we asked, are you confident that your local government's current technology workforce expertise uh, is there to fill key roles and skill sets, given the advent of Gen AI, we kind of compared with NASCIO's data and our data. And when it comes to highly confident, we're kind of together on that. Slightly confident, not much more different. Maybe the locals a little bit more so. Neutral, we're less neutral, and less confident. The states are a little bit, but these are very, very close numbers, no matter how you look at it. So that's one thing that we're looking at. When we ask about what are the concerns regarding the impact of generative AI on your local government, including workforce, contractors, staff augmentation, number one, security. And I need to echo what NASCIO has found. We find that cybersecurity is still absolutely number one concern of all local governments. But when you add the AI filter, we look at security concerns that come from it. We look at privacy issues. We look at the lack of necessary skills as we perceive them, bias and fairness. We worry about inaccuracy, ethical concerns. How do we adopt this under what guidelines? Loss of human touch and personalization. Although there's an aside here. In some surveys that I have read, the public actually has been very positive on AI agents when it comes to citizen engagement. They feel that they're being treated equally, maybe more so than any human might portray in terms of bias or friendly or not friendly. They feel that whoever's calling is getting the same deal. So it's interesting that this new type of automation is actually being well received by the public, even though we all worry about the loss of human touch. I worry about that in staff meetings. And then we worry still about workforce labor displacement. I think that the only area of vulnerability is really going to be where you deal with repetitive type of operations. And this is where RPA comes in, and that's something that would have grown no matter what. And then the whole issue, do we have the infrastructure that can support all of this? When we asked, is there a single individual who has been assigned responsibility for coordinating AI development, only 11% said yes, 63% said no. And then for maybe almost just under a third, the responsibility is spread among more than one person. This issue came about because last year's executive order, which may well be rescinded, required that every federal agency establish a chief artificial intelligence officer. The idea being that somebody needs to really be in charge or should be in charge to help coordinate things. I think Doug and I are very much in agreement that we really don't need that position, but someone should be involved in coordinating the activities. And that person, the most likely person, should be the CIO. So this is interesting in terms of what is the impact in terms of AI leadership in local government. And the answer is not sure yet. A second survey that we did, and that was our cybersecurity that we combined with our annual city county government. So we consolidated these two together. And there's a lot of parallels here. We worry about the increasing sophistication of threats, and that's something that Doug mentioned just a few minutes ago. We worry about inadequate cybersecurity staffing. We worry about legacy infrastructure and solutions to support emerging trends. We worry about decentralized IT and security infrastructure and operations. We worry about the lack of adequate funding. We lack the attention to commitment of leadership, uh, the perception that we are secure enough. That's kind of a dangerous thing. And I hear this a lot. We're doing the best we can. And my sense is, with lack of any standards, that's not good enough in today's environment. And then balancing transparency with the need of security. These are all challenges that have been highlighted by PTI members who took part in our surveys. The next question we asked is really important: is your cybersecurity budget adequate to support cybersecurity initiatives? A whopping 72% said yes, and only 28% said no. So again, this is a marked improvement, but I've also learned that we have become gun shy. And this is a trend that worries me that is not reflected in these numbers. And that is, a lot of those in technology leadership positions are being very careful in what they ask for. And so they recognize that no, they can't ask for everything, and they ask for what they think they can get as opposed to what they really need. And so I wonder, when I see these kind of figures and I talk to folks privately, I'd say, well, this was the best we could have gotten. So on one hand, we can say this is a good picture because it's moving in the right direction. The area of worry for me is that, are we asking enough? Because I come back to that other factor that I mentioned, and that is, we're doing the best we can, in my mind, is no longer good enough. We asked, how engaged and familiar are your elected officials when it comes to cyber organization-wide cybersecurity efforts? The numbers have gone up in terms of very engaged by 7%. Somewhat engaged kind of went down 54%. And not engaged, though, this is what's disturbing, that kind of grew to 16%. If our elected leaders are not the champions for protecting everything that we have in our systems, we're in trouble. And so I think my message here is, we've got to figure out better ways to get elected officials more involved, make them see what the problems are that we face, what are the tools that we're lacking, and make them feel part of the decision as opposed to just making this another line item decision that has to be made. The next question was specific to cybersecurity. How would you rate your relationship between your IT organization and your state's IT organization in terms of information sharing, resource sharing, education, and training? In this case, good has actually gone up. Fair actually has gone down, which is good, but poor has gone up. We This is a problem that Doug and I have talked about for a decade now. And it's not that state CIOs don't want to further engage. It's like, how do you do that when it's one to many? And it's not even necessarily in their job descriptions when you are serving the executive branch of the governor. But clearly, I think some new models are emerging. We're seeing it in Texas and other states, where the states are taking some really cool leadership in establishing regions, taking a regional approach to kind of address, how can we make this an all effort kind of defense? That it's not just, oh, that's only local government, oh, this is only state government, but how do we share the resources, better communicate, and make our systems far more resilient than they are today? So when we concluded, we have an annual event that culminated in the latter part of November. We asked all the attendees, there were over 500, what are the sessions that most interest you moving forward? And the number one thing they wanted more on is innovation. They wanted more on technology strategic planning. Number three, they wanted more on cybersecurity governance and trends. Now, number four was artificial intelligence. That's not to say that for some that is their number one thing, but this is aggregate. They wanted to learn more about network modernization. And a new field that I think is growing, which is so important, is understanding business relationship management. And this is something that I see happening in many local governments and perhaps state governments as well, where in the past, CIOs would look at all the operating departments as their customers. And we're finding in advanced cities and counties that paradigm has somewhat changed, and they're looking at their colleagues who are in these operating departments as their partners, not just their clients. And if you bring them up to that status, that changes expectations, it changes how we work, and it also requires understanding business relationships. And that's why I know in at least one county, all the deputies of one CIO have actually gone through certification to be a certified business relationship manager, which I think is terrific. They continue to worry about recruiting and retention. This is going to be something that's going to be with us for, I think, years to come. And then learning more about how we can better engage with our communities. And that's really the key things that we heard. So that leads me to where we are now. Taking all that I've heard and looking at all the surveys and talking to all the folks, let me just share with you what I believe to be the issues that we're going to have to watch this coming year. The first is going to have to be the Internet of the artificial intelligence of everything and understand what the implications are when everything that is being offered to us today by all our vendors that we work with for years are now offering AI as part of their offerings. What does that include? What does it mean? Are there any added risks? We're going to have to overcome AI fatigue because it's everywhere and it's burning some people out. Some people are frustrated because they've not been able to move forward because they're bogged down in developing policies or guidelines, and that really becomes frustrating. And yet, my informal research shows that over 60% of those in government are using it personally. So there's a big divide between when you ask the question, are you using AI yet? Personally, a surprising number of individuals are. They're using it to better write, better edit, better create, better organize their thoughts, better outputs, and the like. The list is pretty long there. But on the other hand, when it comes to enterprise solutions, it becomes overwhelming. We need to recognize that. Number three, we're going to be seeing the conversational AI, the rise in acceptance of chatbots. We're going to be talking to these devices. And if anybody hasn't seen the movie Her, which came out in 2013, I highly recommend it. We have a 3-day weekend coming up for most of us. Take a look at Her if you haven't seen it. If you have, take another look. It's really way ahead of its time when it came out. Number four is collaborative technologies. The folks coming into the workforce today are far more collaborative. They want to be collaborative. And I think we have to make sure that we provide them the tools, meaningful tools to make that happen. We still need to look at policies, guidelines, and the missing piece in many of this is enforcement. What happens if? It's great to have policies and guidelines. They serve a very, very useful purpose. But one thing that I see, they all start looking alike. But number two, what's missing is what happens if? What happens if somebody willfully violates? What if somebody causes innumerable harm? What are the penalties? How are these things to be enforced? Because without any kind of enforcement or penalty, what we have is platitudes that sound nice. It makes people feel good, but in many ways, they might be considered meaningless. And then cyber AI, I've identified something like 14 ways that artificial intelligence can help with our cyber defenses and information sharing. So you may want to look at that. There are places that you can turn to, and I'll direct you to that, that give you that kind of outlook. And then we have to worry about the AI divide. All these new terms. And here's where we have a gap. Those who can afford some of these monthly subscriptions or free subscriptions, or those who don't have the computers necessary to take advantage of all the different offerings that are out there, or who feel that this is not something that they're comfortable with and doing, but nevertheless, those who use it will be far more successful than those who don't. And those who have already at a disadvantage will be at a further disadvantage. We must recognize the implications of the AA divide. And now, number 8, return to premise. This isn't about people. That's another issue. But we're seeing more of our local government saying, even at the edge, we're finding some of the response times not to be where we need it to be. With all the bandwidth required, all the things that we're sharing back and forth in our networks. I'm seeing a movement to bring some stuff back in. We're going to see more of a hybrid environment, especially since the footprints of some of the network equipment are much smaller. They're much more resilient to the environment than the larger systems were of the past. So this idea of moving everything to the cloud suddenly has lost some of its appeal. While the cloud still is significant and important, I think we're going to see more of a hybrid. So you'll see, I think, more return to premise. Not everything, but kind of a hybrid. We're going to see more digital identity, more licenses available on our smart devices, more identity authentication. Digital identity is going to be critical in the years ahead for us to be able to prove who we say we are. And then the rising costs of tech. This is something that has been with us a while. We used to be able to argue for technology in the sense it would save money. That argument has long been gone. We can now do that to increase productivity, efficiency, effectiveness, all those things to keep up on regulations and the like. But we have to worry about the rising cost of tech, especially since so many of us have moved from an OPEX to a CAPEX environment. And of course, tech talent challenges. How can local governments, and I would say even state governments, keep all the good people we need to keep when they can apparently make so much more on the in the private sector? This is going to be a challenge. There are some solutions that are being talked about. Some are pretty clever. Like a lot of people that I know are retiring, but they don't really want to retire. They want to remain active, but on their own terms. I think there are so many people that are nearing retirement or have retired that would love to come back 1 or 2 days a week and do some meaningful work. So, tech challenges, we're going to have to find more innovative ways, especially if we cannot afford the salaries that people expect. And then finally, number 12 has been talked about, and I'm seeing it more and more. We continue to see vendor consolidation, and the frustration is fewer choices, and sometimes worse, where, well, they spent all this money on acquisition. We really don't have the resources to do the updates that we used to do. We don't have the ability to support the products as we used to in the past. So these are some interesting things that I think we have to be aware of. There are strategies for each of these when you look ahead. So I want to remind everybody, for those who need that face-to-face, NASCIO's next meeting, the mid-year, will be in Philadelphia this year, and it will be April 28th through May 1st. It is a great event. I hope to be there. And then we have the 2025 AI and Cyber Summit in Washington, D.C. at the IBM Innovation Studio. This is a great event. It will be offered in a hybrid fashion, both in person and remotely. So these are two great things to keep in mind as you look ahead. I mentioned where you can turn for more information on the cybersecurity and all the things you can do. This is a book that has gotten a bit of a buzz, partially because I had a lot of help. I openly acknowledge that I worked with AI in putting it together. So if you haven't seen it, you might want to take a look either in the Kindle version or the softback. But this is a primer for state and local government that is available now. And then finally, all the podcasts and all the things that we do find themselves in sharkbites.net, which is where I have all the things that I write, all the thought leadership and the like. So there's a new episode every week. If you have a story to tell, let us know, and maybe we can highlight you in one of the episodes. So I've gone through a very short, quick journey, as has Doug, and we are now here in the remaining time. Boy, we have 6 minutes to answer questions, and I would welcome your questions. And all I ask is just put in the chat area, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Doug, is there anything you want to add?
Um, I'm scanning this real quick. I don't know if Dale is. I don't see any pressing questions. I would add one item for more details, which I failed to do, which is which you do a good job at, Alan, in covering the other materials. The NASCIO Voices are a biweekly podcast we've been doing for many years, and each year we do a deep dive on the top 10. And so if you're interested in that, very short in December 18th edition of NASCIO Voices, my colleague Eric Sweden, who's really responsible for all the data behind the top 10, does a really good analysis of looking at the top 10 because he has all the historical data. He and I work at looking at those trends and seeing what's challenging. So if you're interested in getting a lot more details than I could provide about the top 10 from the NASCIO perspective from state CIOs, I invite you to listen to that or subscribe to that because we always have some great guests and CIOs and other experts on that podcast. And Amy and Alex do a really good job, and it's not gonna burn up too much of your time and get a good walk in the 20 or 30 minutes that podcast covers. So, like Alan's stuff, we're always trying to have compelling topics on that. So. Let me look through here, Alan. Let's see. Let's see. Well, what influence should the state have on what's going on in the being done at the city and county level? I'm not sure it's influence. In most states, obviously, cities and counties are creatures of the state. They're already under a lot of regulatory burdens and requirements from the states. From the CIO perspective, as Alan mentioned, we've been talking about this. I think there's great opportunity for the city and counties to look at what the states are doing, but they also have their own organizations that they can get resources from. But one of the things that I would point to that is critically important on the city and county level that they should work hand in glove with their states is in cybersecurity and whole of state cybersecurity resilience, and that's something we've been promoting for many years. So there's certainly local governments that are well ahead of states in some areas because their capabilities and they're small enough and agile enough that they can move in those directions. But cybersecurity is one of those areas which has a fairly consistent and persistent gap at the local level in terms of what they were doing. So in terms of risk reduction, the same thing with K through 12. So I guess my argument would be cities and counties should be looking, at the state for cybersecurity guidance, looking at the states for the frameworks that they're adopting and the practices and the control sets that they are putting in place. That would be one significant area of importance for cities and counties.
I saw one question, Doug, thank you, about power generation. This is an issue. I used to believe growing up that electricity was quiet. It had no voice. I've come to realize that data centers are incredibly noisy and causing a lot of problems, especially in my area in Virginia, Northern Virginia, particularly Loudoun County, where there's been an amazing explosion of data centers. And suddenly people living near them are realizing they have very noisy neighbors that vibrate, hum. That's just one part of it. But the other part is, what does it mean for our grid? What does it mean? Because these systems, and there are going to be more of these companies coming online, their hunger for power is unbelievable. And to think that Microsoft is recommissioning 3 Mile Island to have basically their own access to nuclear power to help generate some of its systems, and that we have a power plant that was about to be decommissioned in West Virginia that is now being held online, spewing all that coal in order to satisfy the demands of
Yep,
the AI. It is an interesting issue.
it is. Yeah, the significant public policy issue and discussion, particularly as you mentioned, Loudoun County is kind of the epicenter of that. But now we're seeing more and more Midwestern states and Iowa, Nebraska, and others that are now rethinking their commitment to allowing these massive data centers to be located in rural areas, particularly because of the impact and most importantly the electrical demands. But in order to power all this data from Gen AI capabilities, they're going to have those compute resources. And so it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, whether that's going to be a constraint. It's certainly one noted by a few of our CIOs that they're concerned about the technical infrastructure supporting all of this. And is it sustainable? And then what is the long-term cost right now? It's unknown what those long-term costs could be for a lot of those. So, uh, Alan, I think we've exhausted our time again in 2025. We moved through this pretty quickly. So I
Well, it was a
hope,
bullet train. You picked the
yeah,
bullet train as the art, so we did it.
yeah,
And for
the
those,
bullet train.
again, you'll
Yep.
have access to the PowerPoints, you'll have access, but do go to sharkbites.net, go to pti.org, go to nascio.org. Tons of resources. Everything that we spoke of today is there, and we're absolutely wanting to share with you. So thank you.
Thank you for paying attention and hanging in there with us. And we'll wish you a great 2025.